from the EU Commission representation in London. As I said, just bear with us in terms of the sound, but over to Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there everyone. I'll try to project as much as I can, but sorry if you can't hear at the back. Yeah, I'll put my excuses in early. I'm stepping in for somebody at very late notice, and I'm working with a PowerPoint that I haven't met before, so apologies if this isn't as fluid as it could be. So I work for the European Commission. You probably know the European Commission, one of the bodies that is part of the administration or the government of the European Union, 28 countries, at least for now, that work together for mutual benefit in various ways. Maybe you'll ask me a question about that later on. The European Commission, along with bodies like the European Parliament, the Council of Ministers, the European Central Bank, makes up the government or the administration of the European Union. It's essentially the European civil service, so I'm a European civil servant. I work at the Commission's London office based in Westminster. So we have, the European Commission has a network of representative offices in each of the member states of the European Union, but also around the world in different countries. They function a little bit like embassies. We don't call them embassies because the EU isn't a country, but they have a similar function, reporting back to Brussels, headquarters of the European Union, on developments within a country, but also providing information and liaison with institutions in the country that we're based. I work as a language officer at the Commission's representation in the UK. There's two of us. We're essentially responsible for promoting multilingualism, language learning, language policy, the language industry, so translation, interpreting sectors. And we get to do fairly interesting things. We organise events, we go to events. We have at our representation, which is in Europe House, on Smith Square in Westminster, we have a conference and exhibition space where we put on events. So last month I organised a Dutch language evening. The Netherlands has the presidency of the European Union at the moment, so I organised a Dutch language evening. There are sort of taster classes and lectures about the Dutch language. But I get to go out and talk to schools and universities, generally promoting languages and language industry. I mean, that's just one job that's done from London, and one among many hundreds and hundreds of different types of job that are done in the EU institutions. What I want to do is describe briefly how I ended up working for the EU's institutions, then talk about our recruitment procedure, what kind of opportunities would be available for you and how you go about getting them. I think, well, I'm British, first of all, you probably can tell. There aren't that many Brits that work for the EU institutions. We need more to come and work for us. And I had a monolingual British upbringing. I think it's quite a common misconception that you have to be somehow bilingual to work for the EU institutions, especially in the language jobs. You certainly don't, and I don't know that many bilingual people. Great if you are. I studied biology at university. I did an Erasmus year studying in France, which brought my French up. After university, I went teaching English in Eastern Europe, in Slovakia. Ended up staying there for a few years, moved into other jobs, learned the local language, started translating. Came back to the UK and I studied European environment policy for a master's degree. And the first job I was offered was working as an environment policy journalist based in London for a small environment policy news service. And I'm part of Haymarket, the publishing company. And after a few months based in London, the EU correspondent of the news service, who was based in Brussels, reporting on EU environment policy making directly in Brussels, left, and they said, do you want to go and replace him? You know some French. And it was a no-brainer. It was cheaper to live there for all sorts of reasons. I went there thinking that I'd be there for a year or two. I ended up there for 15 years. I worked in this environment policy job for 10 years and eventually became the editor of this news service. But I fancied a change. And I'd been working for several years covering the EU institutions, so going into the European Parliament, the Council of Ministers, following the meetings, reporting on policy making, talking to people from the European Commission about policies and laws that they were developing and drafting. So I knew what it was like in the institutions, but I never imagined that I would actually go and work for them myself. But I then saw an advert for a recruitment exercise for translators. And you needed to know 2 languages to be able to translate from 2 languages into your native language, your own language. And I thought, well, I've got that, I'll give it a go. To my surprise, I passed this recruitment exercise and then started working as a translator for the European Commission. I did that for about 5 years, and then I saw this opportunity for a secondment to work in the London office doing this outreach role related to languages. So I don't translate anymore, but I do a lot of language related activities and events and so on. It's a 3-year secondment, and if I might be able to extend it by a couple of years, but if not, then I go back to Brussels, where I can go back to being a translator, or because we have a very good policy of job mobility within the EU institutions, I can apply for any of the other jobs that exist within any of the EU institutions. So when the time comes that I do have to go back to Brussels, then I've got a range of options that I can follow. So very briefly, that was how I got into that particular job as a translator, and now stationed in the Commission's UK representation. As I say, we have a huge variety of other jobs, other positions. Where's the screen gone? You're going to need that to see what the range of jobs is. How do I put that on? I can read them out, but that'll be very boring.
There's some technical issues.
Can you hear at the back, by the way?
What we're going to have to do, we're going to have to just start with how we are, and then she's coming up to fix it.
Okay.
We can also send this out, couldn't we?
Yeah. Well, I can
we can send this out. Okay. Let me fix this out. You guys carry on.
It's this screen we need to turn on.
Yeah, it's not coming on.
Oh, right,
so I need to just.
Okay. Well, you have to take my word for it. We have a huge variety of different roles. We have. I'm going to read them out. Sorry, apologies for this. We've got, as well as translators and interpreters, the kind of job that I was doing, we have accountants, we have project officers, socioeconomic analysts, contract administrators, economists, lawyers. We've got economists and lawyers coming out of our various orifices, financial specialists, project managers, I think I might have mentioned those, and things called policy officers. That's an important one for a slide that you're not going to see in a couple of minutes. So that's just a taster of the kind of jobs that exist within a large administration of a large international organisation. For some of those jobs, particular qualifications are needed. To be a translator or an interpreter, you need knowledge of 2 other foreign languages. It's coming back slowly. To be an economist, you will need an economics qualification. But there's a large class of jobs for graduates where you only need a degree, no more than that. And so for those of you that don't have the specialist qualifications, at least that is open to you. Right, that's not what I have on my screen, but wasn't it worth waiting for? Okay, so these are just some of the roles that we have. So that's the kind of job you might end up doing. Where would you end up working? Well, a career in the EU might lead you to be recruited by any one of these bodies. I mentioned the European Commission here that I work for, the Council of Ministers, which is where governments assemble in the European Union, the European Parliament, you'll have heard of those. But you've got things like the European Court of Auditors, those that have auditing qualifications, based in Luxembourg. Curia, that's the European Court of Justice, large institution with lots of staff. And there are various others that you may or may not have heard of. They all function more or less autonomously. They have their own separate staff who are collectively the EU civil service. and you would be recruited separately by one of those. Luckily, we have a unified recruitment procedure where you have to undergo one series of tests, and it is a series of tests, that would lead to potential recruitment by any of these organisations. Physically, where would you be in the world? Well, Brussels, the headquarters of the European Union. We also have a large number of staff in Luxembourg, where various large offices of the EU's institutions are based, such as the European Court of Auditors and the European Court of Justice. And about 80% of EU civil servants work in either Brussels or Luxembourg. So during your career, almost certainly you would spend time in one of those places. They're both really nice places. I mean, notwithstanding recent things happening in the news, they're both very, very good and interesting places to live. About 20% of our staff are based elsewhere around the world, in these representative offices that I mentioned, where I'm currently based. But also we have, for instance, a large research operation in northern Italy, and there are various other offices and EU agencies dotted around Europe in particular, but also the world. What are the general eligibility criteria? You have to be an EU citizen to get a permanent staff position working for the EU institutions. There's no way around that, unfortunately, so if you don't have an EU passport, beg, borrow, steal, marry, somehow find yourself an EU passport. We don't check that kind of thing, so it doesn't matter how you come into it. So you need EU citizenship. The second requirement is that you need to know two languages. Your own language, which has to be an EU language, but you need to have knowledge of a second EU language. So in addition to your native language, your mother tongue. Now at the moment, that language, that second language, has to be English, French, or German. Now I'm sure for those of you whose language is not English, English is easy for you. For those whose first language is English, that means that you would need to have some French or German. This is what we think is the biggest barrier to entry for British people who think, don't I need to speak really good French or really good German? You don't need to speak as well as you might think you have to, but you do have to have knowledge of a second language. We've got subject to change there. That might change, that the English, French, German requirements of the language may change. The Spanish and the Italian governments took the European Commission to court. And they said, why are you not requiring or allowing other languages as that second language? And usually it's the European Commission that takes countries to court, member states. This way it's the other way around, fair's fair. And they won the case. And so our recruitment office, whose presentation this is, and whom I don't work for, are having to deal with the effects of that court judgment. So it may be that in the future that second language can be any of the EU's 24 official languages. So that includes Maltese, Irish, Estonian, Bulgarian, if any of you speak any of those languages, and others as well, including Italian and Spanish. So they're the basic requirements. And then depending on the kind of position that you'd be applying for, various qualifications would be required or may not be required, beyond just, for instance, for the graduate positions, a degree of any kind. For instance, for the translation job that I do, no qualification is required beyond having a degree, not even a degree in a language, which I don't have, or a translation qualification, also, which I don't have. The way we recruit people is by open, competitive civil service examination procedure. A test or a competition, as we call it, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the concours, using the French term. So it's a competition, a series of exams. And for instance, for translators, the one that I did, I'm speaking from experience, part of that procedure was a translation test where I had to show I was able to translate. Okay, there we go. They're the basic eligibility criteria. What kind of qualities, abilities, characteristics are we looking for in the people that we recruit? Well, we test as part of that competition procedure 8 different, well, they call them competencies, Yeah, there we go, competency. I hate that word. Skills I prefer. Analysis and problem solving, all one word. Communication, delivering quality and results. Learning, being resilient, working with others in an international, multilingual, multinational environment. Leadership potential, good organisation. I mean, the kind of qualities that any self-respecting employer wants you to have, but we test for those 8 qualities during that competition procedure. I said that we recruit for most of our jobs through a competitive procedure, an open competition. Virtually all our permanent staff have to come through that competition procedure. We also have contract agents. They're shorter term posts doing various jobs, not permanent staff. They are recruited through a sort of abbreviated competition procedure. Information on both of those is at this website, eucareers.eu. It's a huge and really useful website. If you only write down one thing, please write down this website and go to that. There's an enormous amount of information there. When we announce new competitions, in other words, new recruitment exercises, we also do them at that site. We then have other kinds of jobs, other temporary jobs, traineeships, freelance opportunities, for instance, for translators. And that you find information on those, not through that general EU Careers website, but the website below. And we can circulate the slides so that you can get that. Oh, there we go. So, the competition procedure that I mentioned, the basic overview of this, you apply online. When you see that we've announced a competition to recruit, for instance, translators, for instance, economists, for instance, lawyers, you say, okay, I think I'm qualified for that, I want to go for it. You have to make an online application at that site, eucareers.eu. You have to register and then make a formal application. The next stage is a series of computer-based tests. These are multiple choice tests testing numerical, verbal, and what's the other one? Abstract reasoning, and situational judgment is another one. Basically, from the number of applications that we get, we're looking to narrow them down to a final pool of people that pass our exams, from which we then recruit individuals. And that first stage, the computer-based tests, that whittles it down to a more manageable number. Those computer-based tests you can do in any country. So you do them in your own country. There will then be, it's not on this slide, but there's then an intermediate stage, a series of tests, depending on the kind of job you're applying for. So if you're applying to be an economist or a lawyer, there will be some kind of test based around those skills. Who did the translation competition, there was a translation test. The next and final stage, the definitive stage, the deciding stage, is something called an assessment centre. That happens almost always in Brussels. There you do get a flat rate contribution for your travel and accommodation costs to come to Brussels to do that. And it's at that stage that we test those 8 skills. You have to do 3 things. You have to do a panel interview, a structured interview with a panel. You have to do a group exercise with a series of other candidates. And you have to do a presentation. You're given a subject, some time to prepare, and you have to deliver a presentation. Now the key thing about this stage is that you have to do in your second language. So currently English, French or German. In the future it could be any of the 24 languages. In my case it was French, that was the best language that I knew. And so I had to do those things in French. Now, for those that may think they're not as confident in that second language ability to come through that, I would stress that at this stage, that assessment centre, it's not a test of your language knowledge at that point. It's a test of those 8 qualities, competencies, skills. As long as you can get across what you have of those 8 different qualities, that's what the people assessing you are looking for. It doesn't matter if your French pronunciation isn't so good, or if you're not getting the verb in the right place in the sentence if you're speaking German. As long as you can speak enough to get across what you have about you and what you can offer in terms of those 8 different things, that is sufficient. Okay. Back to the different kinds of profiles that we have if you come through that stage. We have something called generalists, more about that in a minute. Auditors are obvious, somebody might have an auditing qualification. Translators, again, are obvious. We're recruiting cybersecurity specialists for obvious reasons. Actually, my account was hacked yesterday, not my commission account, but a different one. Lawyers and lawyer linguists. Lawyer linguists are essentially people with a law qualification but know 2 additional languages, not just 1 but 2 additional languages. They're essentially translators with a law qualification. They start off on a much higher salary, so if you have a legal qualification and you know 2 other languages in addition to your own, that's a profile that you could apply for. I'm going to skip this because I have a feeling that we're running out of time. Generalists, I mentioned. I said earlier on in the introduction that depending on the role, you might need certain qualifications for certain jobs, economists, lawyers. But every year we have a large competition that we call a generalist competition, where you only need a degree of any kind. It doesn't matter what degree it is, and you can apply for that general competition. And the people that come through that exercise end up working in a team on policy formulation or operational delivery or managing resources. So essentially working in one of the EU's different parts of the civil service that deal with policy. Let's say it's the Agriculture Department of the European Commission. You might be asked to become the expert on fertilizer pollution management. You'd be the one that goes to all the international meetings that deal with this issue, liaise with the different member states, ask for reports on that issue. So you would be given time and support to become an expert on that field. And it could be anything, it could be in the trade department, any one of a number of different departments. And for that you only need a degree of any kind. Okay, I'm going to skip these. When do you apply for these recruitment competitions? Well, the main ones in June, in summer we have linguist competitions, so translators and interpreters. In the summer we have this generalist competition. Now this year, every year we have that. That generalist competition this year has been postponed because of that language requirement that I mentioned. But we're expecting it sooner or later. Actually, best on the next slide. This is just, I took this from the website of that, well, the URL at the top is equivalent to the URL I showed you before, the EU Careers website. But we're recruiting, at the moment, financial officers, project officers, drivers, if anybody's able to drive, linguistic assistants, translators, into those languages in the summer in June. If you're able to translate into Danish, Irish, Croatian, Italian, Latvian or Maltese, look at you. That's the translator jobs that we have this summer. Next year we're expecting a set of different languages, including those who are able to translate into English. But if you go to that website, you'll see that these are coming up all the time. These are the recruitment competitions. Actually, I didn't finish off that earlier slide when I said about that definitive stage, the assessment centre. When you've come through the assessment centre, and if you pass that stage, you end up on something called a reserve list. I'm going to go back a couple of slides now. It's the fourth one here. You end up on a database of candidates who've passed the competition and end up on this thing we call a reserve list. And we know in advance when we hold one of these recruitment competitions how many people we want to be on that list. So we tailor all the stages so that we have that number of people. And that number of people is in turn calibrated to the number of positions that we expect to become vacant in the EU institutions over the next couple of years. So it doesn't guarantee you a job once you come through that competition procedure. But it does give you a very good chance, particularly if you're then proactive and you start lobbying if you know a particular area that you want to go into. But it's at that stage, once you've done all the tests and you're on this reserve list, that a more traditional recruitment phase happens. When a manager in a particular department wants to recruit somebody, he looks through that list of people that have passed the competition and says, right, which one of them do I like? Now I can look at their CVs, see what other experience they have, what other skills, and so on. They can't just go on the open market and plug people off the internet. They can only take people that have passed this competition. That's why it's so important to do it. I think, because I've got a sense that I've used up quite a lot of time, I'm going to just go through to the end and say we have traineeships as well. I've been talking about permanent staff positions. We do also have traineeships of various kinds, internships, we call them traineeships. They last up to 5 months. Most of them are paid, over €1,000 a month, and they're highly sought after. There are 2 intakes a year, October and March, and they're quite competitive. You do need to know another language. As for the permanent staff, you need to have knowledge of another EU language. We have a small quota for non-EU citizens. If you're a non-EU citizen, you can't apply for a permanent job, but you could do a traineeship with us, which give you valuable insight into what it's like working for the EU. These traineeships are not a backdoor into a permanent job with the EU. You still have to pass that competition that I described, but they give you a lot of experience and skills and knowledge that would help you pass that competition. I'll leave it there. I'll say that is the important website, and say thank you very much in the 24 languages of the EU.
That's a question.
Yeah, I was hoping maybe instead we can take something in questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
You said about the whole EU citizenship.
Yes.
How will that be affected if there's some referendum?
Yeah. So, how many people are eligible to vote in the referendum? Can I just, out of interest? Oh, quite a lot of you. Yeah. Well, essentially, if the UK votes to leave, there will be, once the UK has left the EU. Formally, there is going to be that negotiation procedure. There will be no more recruitment of UK nationals, so people with only a British passport. I mean, that much is certain. So if we leave and you've only got a UK passport, I've just wasted 20 minutes of your life. It's at that point, like the footballers used to do, if you can't play for the England national team, if you've got an Irish grandmother, you can play for a different club, that kind of thing. If you can find somehow, back to that beg, borrow, steal, if you're eligible for a passport for a different EU member state, then get that. That's the way you would get in. We don't link the passport to your language or where you were born or brought up. Nothing to do with that. If you have an EU passport, you're eligible to apply wherever you come from. So essentially that, yeah. For this, pardon?
If that wasn't an option, that you could.
If that's not an option, I'm afraid it just won't be open. I mean, as I say, at the moment we do not recruit people that don't have an EU passport.
Yeah.
We keep the jobs for ourselves, I suppose, essentially. The question would be, what happens to the British staff that are already working for the institutions? We're not sure whether they would be just allowed to slowly leak out of the system through gradual retirement, or whether we'd be made redundant, or what, we just don't know. That'll be part of the settlement between the EU and the UK at that point. But I mean, it's academic for you people. We'll know by the time you're applying for jobs. Yeah?
I've got 2 questions if I may. One is, once you're put in that reserve list, how long is that reserve list kept for? Is it 1 year, 2 years?
Yeah, I think nominally it's a 1-year eligibility. However, if you're not recruited within a year, don't despair. These things are almost always extended. They're given an initial expiry date just so that, I think, to be cautious. But that competition procedure that I talked about, particularly the assessment stage, is expensive, it's costly. So we don't want to produce a set of people that pass through it and are available to us, and then just a year later say, oh, if you haven't been recruited, we're going to get some new people. So no, in practice, the validity of that reserve list is extended, so you don't need to worry. It was, in my case, it was over a year. between being on the list and being recruited. So, yeah, it is extended. Yeah.
And the second question is, obviously you work with the European languages, but is there space for people who have other languages? Let's say Arabic, for example, with the refugee crisis. Is there any?
Very definitely, yeah, very definitely. I mean, in the translation service and the interpreting services, the vast bulk of our language demand is in the 24 EU official languages. So working as a translator, you get really good language training. It's been in the EU languages because that's where we have a lot of translation and interpreting requirement. If we need to do the other languages in the translation service, if we don't have the internal capacity, we freelance it out. But in the policy DG, so the rest of the EU institutions, let's say the humanitarian aid department, all those other departments that have to deal with the outside world and the different parts of it, they need people with language skills where you use those languages more directly. So you perhaps wouldn't demonstrate that as part of the competition process. You have to, the language requirement has to be one of the EU languages, the second language, and your first language as well. But then when you're on the reserve list and the managers are recruiting and they're looking down the list of people, there may be somebody, let's say, in the climate change department who has a vacancy for the desk that deals with Asia. And if you're somebody that has knowledge of Mandarin, well, you know, you're going to stand out. And there's, you know, there are examples like that across all the different policy departments of the European Commission and the other institutions of the EU. Very definitely.
Was that thunder?
Yeah.
Or maybe British Navy is doing some exercise.
The cable car's still running at least.
But it's snowing again, so sit there though.
That sounded like more than thunder, didn't it?
That did. That sounded a bit serious. Do you want to take two more questions?
Yeah.
And then we'll move on.
The others, yeah?
Do you want to stand up?
Yes, just a quick question.
Yeah.
In relation to the lawyers linguists, you said they need to be lawyers and know more languages than you do. But do they have to be qualified lawyers, or do they have to have a law degree?
Very good question, you're right. I didn't point that out. You need a law degree or a law conversion course. So a law conversion course is adequate. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if that's what you have. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be a law degree per se, but it can be a conversion
It's
course.
snowing, everyone.
Yeah.
In April. It is snowing.
Skip summer.
Wow. We have one final question, please.
Before we take that,
Yes.
I realised I didn't. I mean, I talked about that. I talked about that procedure of going through the competition procedure for getting these permanent jobs. I mean, it's quite a rigmarole and it demands quite a lot of preparation. I didn't say what the compensation is. You know, what the package is at the end of it. The basic starting salary for graduates is around about €4,500 a month. I mean, you get more money working in the city, probably as a lawyer or starting off in the city. But for many of the positions, certainly for translators, that's a pretty good package. You have good leave and generally very good other bonuses that come in depending on family status and so on. Just so you know. Hopefully that's a bit of tempting.
Is it tax free?
Is it tax free? Good question. We no, but it's not the kind of tax you're thinking of. EU officials do not come under a national tax regime. They come under the EU budget tax regime. So we do pay tax, but it goes directly to the EU budget.
How much is it approximately?
That is the net figure, though. That's the net figure that I was giving you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Net figure.
Well, about €4,500
Okay.
a month.
Oh, that's the net figure.
Yeah, I think. Pretty sure.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
How much person who win all the competition and pass the selection, how much possibly it would get paid if we win the competition, some kind of position?
Well, that's it. So everybody that comes through. Well, that's a good. I like win the competition. That's good. It feels like you've won something. Yeah, we call it selection procedure. So you've come through the selection procedure. You're on the reserve list. That is the starting salary for everyone. There's no variation. Certain, lawyer linguists, for instance, they start off 2 notches higher up the salary scale. Actually, maybe lawyers and economists do as well. You're testing my knowledge. Which would be about 6 years worth of salary advancement through the system. So it's about 3 years per grade. So you start off at grade AD5 in our jargon, where I started, and then you do roughly every 3 years. But if you're a particularly outstanding individual working for the institutions, then you can be promoted in 2 years to the next salary stage. So promotion in our terms is increase in salary rather than increase in responsibilities. But there is, of course, a separate advancement in terms of responsibilities, right through the managerial roles.
One final question.
If a Brexit actually happens, does that mean English as a language does not develop the language?
Yeah, another good question. No, even if the UK removes itself from the EU, English will remain one of the 24 official languages through the Republic of Ireland, which is almost certain not to leave the EU. So English will remain one of the languages, and it will remain the overwhelming lingua franca within the EU institutions. And people will still be using English. All the original documents will be drafted in English as they are now, and then translated into the other languages. So it's quite interesting how that English language knowledge is going to be accommodated and taken care of if a large English-speaking country is not able to send people to work for it. But English will still be there. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Call our next speakers, please. Yeah. Thank you so much. Please say do you have a presentation? Yeah. Okay guys, are we ready? I'd like to welcome Natasha Brown, Media and Communications Officer for the IMO. So she's going to tell you a little bit about the IMO, what they do, and then we have our other 2 speakers here. So again, if you can keep your questions quite succinct and short, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hello everybody, it's good to be here. I'm the Media and Communications Officer at the International Maritime Organisation. We're a United Nations specialised agency based in London. My previous career I studied languages at university, French, Spanish, Russian and a bit of Portuguese. I then went to work for a newsletter, writing articles and going and interviewing companies in Brazil, Portugal, France, Spain and everywhere. I then joined Reuters news agency as a graduate trainee journalist, and I worked there for 7 years. I worked in Portugal and Russia and around the different news desks in London, and I then applied for the job working in the media department at the International Maritime Organisation. So instead of being a journalist, asking the questions. I'm now the person that the journalists come to with questions about what we do. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about International Maritime Organisation, let you know a bit more about what we do, and a little bit on the end about careers at IMO. So let's go through. So the dots on the screen, they are all ships, where you can see the large bits dots together. That's where you have the major shipping lanes. So our role at IMO is to make sure that all those ships are trading efficiently, safely, no maritime security, lessening, restricting the pollution that goes into the atmosphere. So that's why we need an maritime organisation, because the ships are trading internationally. They're not just staying in one jurisdiction. Many different flags stay in many different ships. Maritime security, efficiency of shipping, and prevention of pollution from ships. We are, as I said, we're a specialised UN agency, so like the World Health Organization or International Labour Organization. We're the main UN headquarters agency in London. We have nearly 300 staff working in the IMO building and many different nationalities represented. So we have people working in all the different sections: the Office of the Secretary General, so the personal assistant, the managing the Secretary General's diary, and then we have specialists, professionals who are working in the different divisions: maritime safety and security, marine environment, marine biologists, marine engineers, naval architects, lawyers working in the legal affairs, external relations, dealing with protocol and so on, so people who've studied international relations perhaps, as well as the media office, so media specialists, conference section including the translators and the interpreters, technical cooperation people. These are the people who are project managing the technical cooperation activities in the field to help countries build their capacity to survey ships, certify ships, prepare for oil spill response and so on. Administrative, so we have people working in human resources, IT and so on, and then we have a number of qualified auditors who are helping run the IMO member state audit scheme. So we have professional staff, which are people who have degrees like yourselves and higher degrees, and then general service staff recruited locally who perform the administrative support functions, but they are more and more doing more and more higher level activities, because we used to have, this goes back to the old days where general service were literally the people who were typing on the old-fashioned typewriters, and that's all they did. They just used to type things up and organise things, but nowadays general service staff actually do a lot more, because people don't need someone to type their own email. Professional staff are writing their own emails. 171 member states and associate members. We also liaise with the intergovernmental organisations such as the European Commission, Arab League, Africa Union, and all the non-governmental organisations who are involved with the world of shipping, as well as ship owners, ship operators, seafarers, but also the environmental lobby groups, Worldwide Fund for Nature, Friends of the Earth International, Greenpeace. They are sending people to participate in the meetings where we develop the international regulations for shipping. So you may be involved with IMO, not just working at IMO, but when you go and work for one of these NGOs, or when you go and work for the European Commission and the Climate Change Department, you may end up coming to IMO in London for one of our meetings. Our budget is paid for by the biggest shipping fleets. The largest flag states in the world, Panama, Liberia, Marshall Islands, they pay towards the running of IMO, although they only have one vote per country. So Panama does not get a bigger say in how IMO is operated and run. And we have the main IMO treaties, which you may have heard of. SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea. The first treaty was actually adopted after the Titanic incident in London. So London, the UK called a conference in the wake of the Titanic, and that adopted the first Safety of Life at Sea conference. And today, when you go on a ferry or cruise ship, as I'm sure you do, when you look at the life jackets, you'll see the letters SOLAS, because they're SOLAS, certified to SOLAS standards. The other main treaties are load lines covering stability, MARPOL prevention of pollution from ships, COLREGs, collision regulations, and SECW standards of training, certification and watchkeeping for seafarers. There's another International Labour Organisation treaty which is very important for the welfare of seafarers, which is the Maritime Labour Convention. We have more than 50 IMO treaties, and they cover every aspect of shipping, so that's why we need all these people working together to develop these regulations. Implementation, a quick bit on this slide, the flag states actually implement on board ships. So IMO staff, as IMO, we're not going on ships and inspecting ships, we're removed from that. We're supporting the governments to develop the regulations, and the governments are actually the people who employ the surveyors who are going out on board the ships and checking them there, or the port state control officers who are checking in ports. And that's why we have a big technical cooperation program where we are supporting the states to build their capacity to carry out those functions. Our main, like other big organisations, we have an assembly and a council, and then committees and subcommittees which go into developing the technical regulations. So that's where our staff come in to support every step of the process, whether it's from a casualty or new technology coming in, proposals put forward, they have to be submitted, developed, and then we agree a draft that's circulated, and then that finally is adopted or approved. So that's just a process. I'm going quite quickly through here because this is really about the process by where we work. Some of the main issues we're dealing with at the moment: passenger ship safety, what should the rules be for the ships carrying industrial personnel going to work on wind farms and so on, cyber security, a big issue we're looking at the moment, piracy and armed robbery against ships, the humanitarian problem of unsafe mixed migration by sea, the search and rescue issues, facilitating trade, the Facilitation Convention. In the environmental field, we have something called the Ballast Water Management Convention you might not have heard of, but this covers the transmission of alien species in the ballast water of ships, which we want to stop. We need to kill off any species that are on the ballast water of ships. The ships take on ballast water for stability, but they can be released in a new environment and bring new species. So invasive species. That's why we need a marine biologist to work for us and who are able to work on these kind of issues. Emissions, climate change issue, a really important debate at IMO, because all of those ships that you saw earlier on the satellite image are all going to be producing greenhouse gas emissions. We also have a treaty covering ship recycling. We do a number of awareness days where we work on social media campaigns, activities. This year our theme is shipping indispensable to the world, because without shipping we wouldn't have all the things that we need and all the things that we want. Shipping transports more than 80% of world trade. We also have a day of the seafarer every year, 1.5 million seafarers worldwide, all working on those ships to bring us those goods and commodities. Careers at IMO. So the type of work is supporting the member states. Our role at the Secretariat is to support the member states. So as I said, the career paths would be experts. You need to already have skills and knowledge. You can't come into IMO as a professional with just a degree. We require, depending on the job and the role, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years or more experience. So you do need to go out if you're interested in the maritime field, eventually coming to IMO. You need to go out and get a job in the maritime field, maritime lawyer, project development, human resources, media and communications and so on. We do have a number of careers, and when there are posts they are advertised on our careers page, but as I said, you need to, we're not at the right level for you guys yet, you do need to go out and get that relevant experience. We also have an internship program which is designed for postgraduate students undertaking research in a field related to the work of the International Maritime Organization. So we provide a possibility for you to come and do your research based at the IMO in our Maritime Knowledge Centre, which gives you the opportunity to attend the IMO meetings, speak to the IMO experts about your particular topic, and then that will help you to produce your research. But these are unpaid, so they give you an opportunity to come to IMO and put that on your CV, but it's not the classic sort of work type internship. And again, we have more information about that on our website. This slide is just a reminder. As I said before, the majority of world trade is carried by sea. They say without shipping, if shipping suddenly stopped tomorrow, something happened at 9/11 and shipping stopped, half the world would freeze and half the world would starve, because we really do rely on shipping. So we do need a global regulatory body for shipping, and we need experts around the world and working at IMO, coming to IMO meetings, coming from the different member states who can come to IMO and help develop the regulations to make sure that we keep shipping safe, secure and environmentally friendly. So that's a very quick introduction to IMO. We do have Twitter, IMOHQ, Facebook page, IMOHQ. We have a YouTube channel, IMOHQ, with a number of different videos explaining the work we do. So if you do have an interest in the maritime field, have a look at our videos, and hopefully that will inspire you to maybe look towards a career in the maritime fields, and hopefully one day you will be coming to meetings at IMO or applying for a job at our organisation. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you stand up? Thank you.
I was wondering about such an important body of United Nations as maritime organization. How come you have such small budget?
That's a good question. We do a lot with a very small budget. We're one of the smaller UN agencies, but I think we do quite a lot compared with the size of the organisation and the size of the industry that we deal with. We actually do a lot with very few people. We all work very hard, twice as hard as as everywhere else. So we've been constricting the number of staff and doing more work. Some of that is helped by new procedures, and for example, previously translators, everything used to be audio, gone to audio, and then you'd have an audio typist typing up what the translators translated verbally. So now the translators simply type into the screen. So new processes have enabled us to reduce the staff. But yeah, we do a lot with very little.
Brilliant. Did you want to mention?
Yeah, we'll have some
here?
cards at the front here, so if you want to pick up, and this just gives you the links to our website and so on. You could even send it to your friends.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Okay, I'd like to welcome Nigel Watt from the Coordinating Committee for International Voluntary Service. Let me just get rid of this for you.
If you could.
Speak, yeah.
I might have been able to bring one of those, but I'm actually not exactly from the Coordinating Committee for International Voluntary Service today. The president, who's at the office in France, couldn't come, so I was asked to come at short notice. So I only have a small piece of paper. But I was in fact the director of this organisation, which I'll mention in a minute, in the 1990s. And I'm currently still involved with voluntary service as an advanced age, as chair of a British voluntary organisation called Volunteer Action for Peace. I was a bit surprised when I was asked to come along here, because I thought, well, volunteering isn't exactly a career. Although I did manage to spend 20 years of my life working for volunteering organisations, but I don't really recommend it. The pay is lousy, and there aren't many such jobs. But being a volunteer and the experience of volunteering can be very significant, I think, in one's life, in perhaps deciding what you want to do, eventually putting on your CV, of course, on widening your horizons, all sorts of things. And it can lead maybe to taking right decisions in some cases that you wouldn't have taken otherwise. So as something to do normally at a younger age, although in fact there are volunteer options now for retired people as well, or for people at any age, it's something you should think about. I'll say a little bit about the organisations that exist. The Coordinating Committee for International Voluntary Service was actually set up through UNESCO and has always been based in the UNESCO office in Paris. After the Second World War, a lot of voluntary organisations sprouted or enlarged themselves to help deal with all the post-war problems of, again, migration, reconstruction and so on. And there was no coordination, so the UNESCO helped set up this coordinating body. It's not an operational body that actually runs voluntary service. It coordinates lots and lots of different organisations in about 100 countries that do so on the national level, or in some cases they are international organisations covering a certain number of countries. And there are different traditions of voluntary service. The one I represent is really, you could call it part of a peace movement. It grew up after the First World War as a reaction to the enmity between countries. And the idea was, if people come together to work, rather than playing football or going to conferences or simply going to war, this was a very effective way of creating an international understanding and possibly not, dealing with the problems that lead to war. And I think actually, in terms of the European, we just heard about the European Union, I think the fact that thousands and thousands of volunteers took part in voluntary work camps in different parts of Europe over the last 50, 60 years has been one of the factors that has given a kind of European consciousness, even in this country up to a point, with over the whole of Europe, and of course wider than Europe. The sort of volunteering activities which exist are quite various. The one, as I say, in the tradition, the peace tradition that I come from, the basic sort of activity is the International Work Camp. This is where a group of people, normally young, normally in their 20s, but often older or younger, some cases, come together for a period of 10 days up to a month, working on a project. It could be a social project, it could be a manual construction project, it could be an environmental project, cultural project, all sorts of things, depending on the country, the context, and so on. There are then longer term possibilities, some of which are not professional. You don't need any qualification, or at least pretty basic ones, like working perhaps for several months, 6 months or a year, as an assistant teacher somewhere. I did that myself in India when I was very young, for a short time. Then there are more professional voluntary service posts, which organizations such as VSO, which you probably heard of in this country, United Nations Association of International Service, which our colleague may mention, and others recruit for. And this normally is people working for a couple of years and having minimum usually 2 years, and having being carefully selected and having competent skills which they can then pass on or exchange with the country they're working in. And that's usually working in countries in what we call the global south. Then there's also another group of organizations which we kind of sometimes call the gap year industry. It's more commercial, because our kind of voluntary service is totally non-commercial, non-profit making. So there are some companies that run what is something called voluntourism. You go for you're a tourist, you take part in some voluntary service. They can be quite well organized, it can also be a good experience. So basically what is possible is an experience that really can change your outlook on life quite significantly. It's not always perfect, obviously it can be tough sometimes, it can be badly organized occasionally, but it's actually worth doing. I'll just mention my own rather extraordinary life story, which illustrates some of it. I was originally, we used to have a military service in this country, and I was a conscientious objector, and one of the things that the government in its wisdom allowed was that COs could actually take part in voluntary service work. The options were otherwise hospital, agriculture, and so on. So I did a year in agriculture, I did some months in a hospital, I did some months as a volunteer. And this took me from a fairly comfortable existence in the south of England to painting slum properties in Glasgow, which was quite a culture shock, and a very good one for me, I think, and went on from there to working in Northern Ireland, in Austria, in Germany, in France. And I suppose the kind of excitement of doing something internationally, it's good for your languages, of course, although English is becoming more and more dominant, you still come across a lot of languages wherever you go. It gave me the appetite to work overseas, which I did. I worked as a teacher in Zambia, later on as for Christian Aid in Burundi. So it's something which, as I say, can inspire you. It can occasionally make you feel a bit low, but on the whole, it's a rewarding and exciting experience. It can also sometimes lead to better jobs. When I was working at CCIVS, two people who'd been kind of volunteers in this UNESCO context ended up getting quite good jobs actually in the United Nations system. One of them quite high up in UNESCO, a Bulgarian guy. I don't know what his position is now, but he's pretty high up. And another one who was a French person of Vietnamese origin, and he worked with us in a very humble post. He's ended up again in, I think it's in UNDP, doing quite well. So there are ways of exploiting that experience for looking for jobs as well. In terms of how to, if you're interested, or if your young brother or sister or somebody is interested, how to go about it here and now is that there are, as I say, several organizations, and of course I have to advertise the one I'm in at the moment, which is called Volunteer Action for Peace. There's a few leaflets on the table where we had lunch, or I can give you, and I will give you now the website. I haven't got any presentation, as I say. It's vap.org.uk, Volunteer Action for Peace. And there's the normal online application form, a registration payment. If you're going to a country outside of Europe, or even very often inside Europe now, you pay also another fee to the receiving organisation. So it isn't totally free. You don't earn anything, but at least in some of the longer term ones you do. You can get posts with pocket money, but you do have to pay something because voluntary organisations have to somehow exist. And obviously in the case of the commercial organisations you pay more, but you are more cosseted. You know, your fares, your travel is found, your insurance is found, and so on and so on. So I think that's about all I have to say.
Brilliant.
Any questions?
Yeah, do you have any questions? If you could stand up again.
I hope that's loud enough.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to have a loud voice.
What do you think about volunteerism? Because I heard that recently it's quite widely seen.
Sorry?
Volunteerism?
Volunteerism.
Recently it's quite big, becoming quite
Yes.
widespread, so I was wondering what's your...
Well, I mean, some of us treat it as a dirty word, but no. I mean, it's a process where perhaps you're having you've got a few months off. You'd like to visit Thailand or Malawi or wherever it is, and it's an opportunity to be a tourist, but at the same time do some voluntary work as well. And the advantage of at least mixing it with voluntary work is that you get under the skin of the country a bit more than if you don't, which is why, as I say, going, for example, to a work camp in Ghana or India, wherever it might be, equally gets you into that country in a way that, as a visitor, staying in the hotel or even if you're backpacking, doesn't. Because you actually meet people, you make friends, you probably get invited home with them and so on. So it's a good experience.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. No. Okay, I'd like to introduce Richard Nelms, and he's from the United Nations Association in the UK.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's quite a long afternoon, I guess, for you guys. Listening to a lot of information and a lot of stuff, and I hope that it's been helpful, and I hope that what I've got to say to you will be helpful now. I've only got 10 minutes, and I want to keep this as relevant and possible to your experiences and the reasons that you came today. So I'd like to do three things. I'd like to talk about my organisation, UNA UK, and my role. I'd like to talk about a particular project that exemplifies what I do. And I'd like to talk then a little bit about me, I guess, and the route that I took to take the role that I have right now. So the United Nations Association is completely independent from the United Nations itself. We were set up at the same time as the UN, and most countries have a UN association. And our goal is to connect people in the United Kingdom with the work and values of the United Nations. We are a tiny team of 7 people, which actually I find quite exhilarating. I need to know how to do everything that my organisation does. I'm the head of outreach, so I attend our board meetings of our trustees, but also I know how to operate the database. It also means that I get involved in a lot of the decisions that the organisation makes, and it's very easy, and a lot of our new recruits have an opportunity at a very early stage to get involved in the strategic planning of the organisation, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I also like that we're a little bit scrappy. The presentations today have been so interesting, talking about the different routes that you take, the different departments, the different expenses that you'll be paid, etc., etc. We don't have that as a small team of 7 people. We're flexible and we move quickly. We pick subjects where we think we have a voice and we can make things change, and we move with it. And because of our expertise set, we're not heavily segregated in terms of our skill set, but we get on top of an issue, we get to grips with that issue, and we try to make a change in the real world. And one of those projects is our 1 for 7 billion campaign. This is a campaign to change the way that the United Nations Secretary General is elected. Remember, I said we're independent from the UN. That means we can actually be a critical friend to the United Nations. And up until now, the UN Secretary General has been chosen in secret by the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, which I don't need to tell the people in this room were simply the winners of World War II 70 years ago. So anachronistic, to say the least, but we also think unfair, and we also think that you wouldn't find the next chairman or ED of a major corporation in this way, and we think it's discriminatory for an organisation that really, of all organisations, shouldn't be discriminatory. So what did we do? We found some other people that were interested in this issue as well, that saw the injustice, saw the problem. We got together with them, we created the 1 for 7 billion campaign, and we lobbied the United Nations, and we lobbied the government, and we lobbied people in this country. That's where my role comes in as head of outreach. I connect people in this country with the work of the United Nations, and I use this as a way to engage them. Isn't it unfair? What can we do to change this? How can we make the world change for the better? The outcome of that, there's a very quick simplification, but the outcome of that was a resolution in the General Assembly, 69321, which I, as part of this small team, am immensely proud of contributing to. Resolution 69321 actually says that candidates have to declare themselves if they want to run for Secretary General. This is the boss of the United Nations we're talking about. They have to declare themselves. They have to go to the General Assembly, those 193 countries, and they have to say, I want to do this job, and this is why I think I can do this job. They produce a vision statement, and people question them on that vision statement. Now, that might not sound like a big leap, but for a process that happened in secret to be a process that happened in the bright sunshine with international scrutiny is a huge achievement. And as UNA UK, we partnered with the Guardian newspaper, and we held in New York the week before last a more informal hearing. So we got 4 of those 9 candidates that have declared. Remember, first time this has ever happened. 4 of those candidates, we got them in a room and we threw some questions at them. And we said, well, he says this, what do you say? She says that, what do you say? Which is a huge coup for international democracy, I would certainly suggest. And we're doing the same on the 3rd of June in London. And I would suggest you go to 1for7billion.org and have a look at the details there. We're actually due to launch today or tomorrow. We're going to hold this at the Barbican Centre. That's 2,000 people from the United Kingdom, the insular United Kingdom, coming and engaging with who's going to be the next Secretary General. Now, I wanted to tell you that story about that project to say, this is fun. Okay, we're not part of the EU, or I don't work for the EU or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but I get to be a part of a small organisation that actually we get to feel the difference and we get to jump on things straight away. So I always wanted to evangelise to you about that. So go to the website, have a look. I think it's a really interesting project. We've made huge strides, and it's certainly the highlight of my career to date. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about the route that I took to where I am now, but I'd really love you to be thinking of some questions to ask me, because this day is about you and it's about equipping you, and I want to hear your questions and answer them as best I can. So I would say I've had 3 jobs in my career in outreach. My title now is Head of Outreach, and so that means, as I said, I'm responsible for connecting people with our work. Previously to that, I had membership roles in national NGOs, in which people paid a membership subscription, whether they liked what we did or wanted to be more involved in what they did. And my responsibility was to increase the number of members and also increase the amount of interaction that they had. So I started at the Evangelical Alliance, which is a Christian charity. I moved on to the Institute of Advanced Motorists. So I guess that's a pretty random, from the Christians to the motorists to the internationalists, is a bit of a random path. But I would say what linked all those together and what got me each subsequent job, I think, was an ability to demonstrate that I could do what the job was asking me to, not what the organisation did as a whole. I'm going to stop there if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Could I take some questions from you? No one cares. The United Nations. Nigel. Nigel cares.
Well, about the selection of the Secretary General, will this take into account the need for the different continents to be represented? Because what was done in the back room at least brought somebody from each different country, although they may have brought some fairly mediocre people. But
yeah, fascinating policy question. Regional rotation is what it's referred to at the UN. The majority of the candidates that have declared are from Eastern Europe because it's, quote, their turn. We, as a campaign, don't think it should be anyone's turn. We think it should be the best person for the job. So we pushed for candidates from across the world, and we've had candidate Helen Clark, who's currently head of UNDP, and declare she's from New Zealand, and also a Portuguese candidate as well. So it's fine. We want the best candidates and the most transparent process. Yes.
I understand why you would want to lobby to change this system, but don't you think the system that's introduced now politicizes the role of one of the figureheads of the UN? So instead of giving his or her quote-unquote real opinion, he or she would need to give a politicized opinion to satisfy the voters.
So the question is, does this politicise, do what we're doing, changing the process in this way, politicise the process? I think my answer would be it's always been political. We produced an advert in The Economist, a fake job advert, and one of the criteria was that the person spec, and you'll be all familiar with person spec because you're looking at international jobs. One of the criteria was that they have no backbone and that they kowtow to the permanent five members. It was very tongue-in-cheek, but that's what the process has always been. So we're looking for, in a professional way, in a transparent way, in a fair way, the best person for the job. So, has it made it political? No, it's always been political. Would be my contention. Okay, so we've got. I'm seeing 3 questions. So we'll start with lady in the black top. Would you mind standing up and saying your name as well? I'd like to hear who I'm talking to.
Hi, my name's Crystal.
Hello, Crystal.
My question is, so you said your organisation is independent to the UN. Is there any kind of influence from the UN or interaction with them?
We try to influence the UN itself. So the question was, just in case you can't hear at the back, is there any influence that we have over the United Nations, and does the United Nations have influence over us? So we try to influence the work of the United Nations, think of ourselves as a critical friend. We're not UKIP talking about Europe, for example, but we will say the UN isn't perfect and these are the ways that we think it needs changing, and try to mobilise campaigns to make that change happen. Does the UN have influence over us? Well, I guess its work does. If it's setting agendas like the Sustainable Development Goals, that's certainly a huge UN project that I think it would be folly not to want to be part of, as the people in the UK who the general public look to almost as the face for the UN, despite the fact that we're completely independent. And then there was a question. Yes, would you like to stand up?
Gavin Dees. I was just wondering, when you were talking about your very multifaceted role, is there any specific skill set you found most useful for that kind of job?
Brilliant, thank you. So Gavin said, I talked about a very multifaceted role, and is there any particular skill set that I think, which puts me, it's a really awkward question because I have to say something nice about myself, which is a very un-British thing to do. But I would say writing, and writing for different audiences. A lot of stuff can be learnt, writing can be learnt, but it can only be learnt with practice and experience. And I have a rolling internship program, and the thing that interns tell me at the end of their 3 or 4 months with us is the thing that they learned the most was writing for different audiences. So any practice that you can get with that, and believe me, on the first day that I have a new intern with me, I get an academic paper. That's no criticism of the internship program. They give a lot to the organisation. They're absolutely fantastic. But I'll get an academic style, I'll get a dissertation style back from a piece of work. By the end of it, they're writing for a general public. They know what the general public is likely to know, and they're responding to that in their style. So writing, and write a lot. I will Google you before I invite you to an interview, and if you've got some good pieces out there, man, that's amazing. Like, I will want to work with you. Oh yes, and there was, sorry, I was kind of following at the back there.
I'm actually vice president of one of your branches.
Excellent.
Yeah, so,
which one?
Queen Mary University.
Oh, excellent. Yes, great branch.
Brand new, actually. Well, the question is, I want to ask. It's very brilliant that you, as well as we, campaign for this change in security. But I suppose the core change, the Security Council's change, actually, when we will change P5 members in an actual democratic way. But do you think that UNA UK, as well as support from us, should campaign for that next year?
That's an excellent question. So, as I heard it, you basically said, great campaign, Rich, well done, carry on. But you also said, but what about Security Council reform? Isn't that just as, if not more important? I would agree. Anyone who's studied international relations, anyone who's been near the UN in their lives will know that this is a knotty problem that is not easy to solve. And I don't know if it's the politician's answer, but I think we started with the 1 for 7 billion campaign. We said, no, hang on, this isn't just for the P5 to decide. This is an issue that we all have a stake in, and we want to input. We want to hear what our potential next world leader is saying and what their vision is for the UN. Now, I think we might have started a trend there. If not, we've certainly got our foot in the door, because when the next appointment happens, well, hang on, is this fair? What's going on here? My boss says that we haven't we're not going to get perfect Secretary General out of this process, but we have raised the political cost of appointing a bad one. And I think that's amazing. It's inches when we want to go miles, but that's fair enough. And that's all I'm going to manage in my lifetime, and I'm kind of reconciled to that. But yes, of course, Security Council reform, absolutely essential. Let's work on it, let's package it up, let's make it a compelling piece to the general public. Are you going to cut me off?
I'm going to cut you off. No, I'm not. I'm going to maybe one more question, if that's okay. Or two more questions, and that's it.
You pick then, if you're saying.
These two here. What, do you want to start off? Yeah.
Stand me up, please. And give me a name.
My name's Mike. How does look the application process to your team?
Okay. So have I sold myself enough to you? You're asking what is the application process to become part of my team? Well, as a tiny team of 7, can't remember if I've mentioned that 17 times already. We don't have that many openings, and I would say don't worry too much about UNA UK. I would say, because I'm biased, find that scrappy little NGO that's got something to offer, that's got a niche, that's got a specialism.
By Google.
By Google. By who's saying what? You read an article in a newspaper about something that you like. There will be somebody behind that trying to get that article into the press. Find your organisation, find 2 or 3, court them, find out who they are, follow them on Twitter, see what they're saying, see who works for them, what kind of people work for them. Really get to know them. If you just want a job, just grab a job. But if you want a job at a particular organisation, you find out who they are, you go to their events, don't be pushy, but get involved with the work that they do. Offer your support as a volunteer or an intern. And I've got to say that stuff that Nigel was saying, he was so modest about the value of volunteering. But again, as I'll Google you before I invite you to interview, I will be blown away if you have worked for a year in Chad on a UN project or something like that. So definitely get the volunteering under your belt.
Okay, last question. There was someone. Yeah. Do you understand that? Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your name?
Shimani.
Hello, Shimani.
You mentioned that you're a very small organisation with 7 individuals. So how do you find the ability to project such massive influence over the multi-greatest agency if you're 7 individuals? I mean, that's quite fascinating.
We're tiny, but the UN is big. How do we punch above our weight? Might be a good way of saying it. How do we have that influence? I think it comes down to what we pick as projects that we can work on and that we can add value to. It's a really interesting existential question. I could talk for hours about it, but I think if you find as an organisation a project that you've got special expertise in, it's essentially about a UN process that we're talking about, and we're the UN association, so we've got that nailed. That's fine. A unique voice. Nobody else is talking about this. We're part of Climate Change Coalition, but we don't add any real expertise, maybe apart from UN processes, to that. So I think it's all about finding your project, talking about it endlessly, as I have now, and being clever, finding out the people that make those issues. A General Assembly resolution absolutely blew me away, and I was so pleased with it, and I can't claim it as my own, it's my organisation's. But we looked at lobbying opportunities there. We looked at countries that were dissatisfied with the process. Funnily enough, those that didn't have a vested interest in the status quo. And I think, in a kind of really potted, incoherent way, that's how we have influence over such a huge organisation that's so abstract and so many miles away.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Now I'd like to welcome Professor Yossi Meckelberg, who's the Programme Director for Regent's University in London. Yeah, thank you. No worries. Okay, guys, sorry. Are we seating? Are we leaving? What's going on here? If I can ask, if you are leaving, yeah, that's fine. Okay.